My name is Emma Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this is the day I bought my parents' house. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine took 12 years to cook, and it came with a deed of sale. If you had told 17-year-old me that one day, I'd be standing on the porch of the house I grew up in, holding the keys, while my parents stood on the lawn in shock, I would have laughed. Back then, I didn't even believe I mattered enough in that house to leave a mark on it. But let me back up, because this story isn't really about a house. It's about being invisible in your own family for 18 years. And what happens when the invisible kid finally gets tired of disappearing. If you've ever felt like the backup child, the afterthought, the one who was loved conditionally while someone else got loved unconditionally, stay with me. This one's for you. From as far back as I can remember, our house ran on a very simple rule that nobody ever said out loud, but everyone understood. My sister, Claire, came first. She was 3 years older than me, and she knew exactly how to use it. Claire got the bigger bedroom. Claire got new clothes every season while I wore her hand-me-downs. Even though we're not even close in shoe size, Claire got piano lessons, dance lessons, a car on her 16th birthday, a Honda Civic, silver, still smelled like the dealership when she picked me up from school and made me sit in the back seat so I don't scratch the leather. I got a bike, used, from a garage sale. My dad handed it to me with a big smile, like it was a huge gift, and said, "This one's all yours, kiddo." I remember comparing it in my head to the Civic sitting in our driveway and understanding, even at 13, exactly where I stood. But Claire wasn't just a favorite by accident of birth order. She worked at being the golden child, and part of that work meant making sure I never forgot my place. I remember being 10 years old and winning a school art contest. My drawing got picked to be displayed in the front hallway of the school for an entire month. I was so proud I could barely sleep the night before the unveiling. Claire came to see it with my parents. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds and said, loud enough for the other kids around us to hear, "It's cute." Very. Elementary school. She was 13. She knew exactly what she was doing. My parents laughed it off as sisterly teasing. I stood there in front of my classmates feeling my face burn. That wasn't an isolated moment. That was a pattern. When I made the honor roll in 8th grade, Claire accidentally spilled grape juice on my certificate the night before. I was supposed to bring it to show my grandparents, and then acted shocked and apologetic in front of my parents while quietly smirking at me when they weren't looking. When I got invited to a sleepover with a group of girls I'd been trying to become friends with for months, Claire's 16 at the time, with a driver's license and full access to my social calendar because she was just being helpful, told my mom I had a stomach bug and shouldn't go, and then told the friend's mom, who called our house directly, that I actually didn't want to go because she thinks you guys are kind of babyish. I never got invited back. I found out the truth about what she'd done nearly 2 years later from the same friend at a birthday party we ran into each other at. Claire, when confronted, just shrugged and said, "I don't even remember that." "You're so sensitive." That was Claire's specialty, cutting you down quietly enough that if you ever brought it up, she could make you sound crazy for even mentioning it. I want to walk you through a few more moments, because I think it's important you understand this wasn't one bad decision my parents made. This was a decade-long pattern, and the college fun was just the loudest verse in a very long, very quiet song. The 16th birthday. When Claire turned 16, she got that silver Civic, a party with 40 guests, a cake from the good bakery downtown, and a full-page announcement in my dad's Facebook feed about how proud he was of the woman she's becoming. When I turned 16, 2 years later, my parents had a family dinner, just the 4 of us, at the same chain restaurant we went to for every occasion, good or bad. There was no car. There was a card with $40 in it. My mom said, "We're saving for bigger things right now. Sweetheart, you understand." I said I understood. I didn't. Not really. But I'd already learned that understanding was the price of staying in this family's good graces. The forgotten birthday. The year I turned 20, I was away at college, deep in my sophomore year, working 2 jobs and barely keeping my head above water. My birthday fell on a Tuesday. Nobody called. Not my mom, not my dad. I sat in my dorm room that night, exhausted from a closing shift at the coffee shop, and refreshed my phone every 20 minutes hoping for a text. Nothing came until 3 days later, when my mom texted, "Happy belated. Sorry, things have been crazy here. Claire had an event for the new business, big week." There was no explanation for why a big week for Claire meant my birthday didn't register on a calendar. There was just an assumption, baked so deep into our family's operating system, that Claire's timeline mattered more than mine, that nobody even had to say it out loud anymore. Graduation. This one still sits heaviest in my chest, if I'm honest with you. I graduated with honors from my architecture program. I'd worked myself half to death for that degree, the 2 jobs, the 4 hours of sleep, the loans, all of it, and the day finally came. I mailed my parents an actual paper invitation, because I wanted it to feel official, like it mattered. I called ahead to confirm. My mom said, "Of course we'll be there, honey. We wouldn't miss it." They didn't come. The morning of my graduation, I got a text from my mom. "Emma, I'm so sorry. Claire's PR launch event got moved up to today, and she really needs us there for support. This is such a big moment for her. We'll celebrate with you soon, promise." So proud of you. I sat in a folding chair in a stadium full of families cheering for their kids, in my cap and gown, completely alone, watching other people's parents hold up phones and cry and wave. I didn't cry. I remember being almost impressed with myself for not crying. Like numbness had become a skill I'd finally mastered. They never did celebrate soon. There was no dinner, no card. It just quietly stopped being mentioned. The way everything that centered me quietly stopped being mentioned in that house. I keep coming back to these moments not because I want your pity, but because I want you to understand. By the time the college fund happened, I already knew, on some level, what was coming. I think some small, tired part of me almost expected it. When I was 12, my parents opened a college fund. My dad worked in logistics, decent pay, nothing extravagant, and my mom worked part-time at a dental office. They weren't rich, but they were disciplined savers. And every year at Thanksgiving, my dad would do this thing where he'd raise his glass and say, "To the girls' futures, whatever they want to be, we've got 'em covered." I held on to that sentence for 6 years. Whatever they want to be, we've got 'em covered. I decided early that I wanted to be an architect. I used to draw floor plans of houses I wanted to build someday, not fancy mansions, just solid, well-designed homes. Something about creating a space where a family could feel safe felt important to me, probably because I never quite felt like I had that. I got into a good state university's architecture program, not Ivy League, but competitive, respected, exactly what I needed. I remember calling my parents from the school parking lot after I opened the acceptance email, crying, actually crying, because for once I'd done something that felt like mine. My mom said, "That's wonderful, honey. We'll figure out the money situation." I didn't think twice about that sentence. Why would I? There was a whole fund. 18 years of saving. My name was on it. 3 months before I was supposed to start school, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. Claire wasn't there. She was already 21, living 2 towns over, working an entry-level marketing job that, coincidentally, she'd need capital to actually turn into a career, since she wanted to eventually open her own boutique PR firm. My dad cleared his throat a lot before he finally said it. "So, sweetheart, we need to talk about the college fund." I remember smiling, thinking they were going to hand me a check or walk me through the logistics of tuition payments. "Your sister has this incredible opportunity," my mom said. "There's a business partner interested in helping her start the PR firm, but she needs to match his investment." And we thought, well, we know you got into a great program, but there are loans and grants, and you're so smart. You'll figure it out. Claire's window is now. This opportunity won't wait. I sat there for a long moment. I actually asked them to repeat it, because some part of my brain refused to process it the first time. They had given my college fund 18 years of savings, my name on the account to my sister, not split it, not loaned her half, given it to her, all of it, for a boutique PR firm that, statistically, had worse odds of surviving 5 years than I had of graduating with an architecture degree. "You'll be fine," my dad said. "You always land on your feet." Later that same week, I found out Claire already knew. She'd known for over a month before I did. When I finally called her, furious, shaking, asking how she could let this happen, she said, calm as anything, honestly, you're the practical one. You'll figure it out. I need this more than you do. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, don't make this a whole thing, Emma. You always make everything about you. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my acceptance letter, taped above my desk. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was never going to ask this family for anything again, ever. I want to be honest about what the next 6 years look like, because the glow up isn't glamorous when you're living it. I took out loans the maximum federal amount, and when that wasn't enough, private loans with interest rates that made my stomach turn. I worked 2 jobs during undergrad, a barista shift at a.m. before class, and a weekend job doing CAD, drafting for a small local firm that paid me almost nothing but gave me real experience. I slept 4 to 5 hours a night for most of my sophomore and junior years. I ate a lot of instant ramen and a lot of free samples at Costco. Not exaggerating. I missed my roommate's birthday party because I had a double shift. I missed my own 21st birthday again because I had a midterm the next morning and couldn't afford the hangover. 3 months before I was supposed to start school, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. Claire wasn't there. She was already 21, living 2 towns over, working an entry-level marketing job that, coincidentally, she'd need capital to actually turn into a career, since she wanted to eventually open her own boutique PR firm. My dad cleared his throat a lot before he finally said it. So, sweetheart, we need to talk about the college fund. I remember smiling, thinking they were going to hand me a check or walk me through the logistics of tuition payments. Your sister has this incredible opportunity, my mom said. There's a business partner interested in helping her start the PR firm, but she needs to match his investment. And we thought, well, we know you got into a great program, but there are loans and grants, and you're so smart. You'll figure it out. Claire's window is now. This opportunity won't wait. I sat there for a long moment. I actually asked them to repeat it, because some part of my brain refused to process it the first time. They had given my college fund 18 years of savings, my name on the account to my sister, not split it, not loaned her half, given it to her, all of it, for a boutique PR firm that, statistically, had worse odds of surviving 5 years than I had of graduating with an architecture degree. You'll be fine, my dad said. You always land on your feet. Later that same week, I found out Claire already knew. She'd known for over a month before I did. When I finally called her, furious, shaking, asking how she could let this happen, she said, calm as anything, honestly, you're the practical one. You'll figure it out. I need this more than you do. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, don't make this a whole thing, Emma. You always make everything about you. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my acceptance letter, taped above my desk. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. I was never going to ask this family for anything again, ever. I want to be honest about what the next 6 years look like, because the glow up isn't glamorous when you're living it. I took out loans the maximum federal amount, and when that wasn't enough, private loans with interest rates that made my stomach turn. I worked 2 jobs during undergrad, a barista shift at a.m. before class, and a weekend job doing CAD, drafting for a small local firm that paid me almost nothing but gave me real experience. I slept 4 to 5 hours a night for most of my sophomore and junior years. I ate a lot of instant ramen and a lot of free samples at Costco. Not exaggerating. I missed my roommate's birthday party because I had a double shift. I missed my own 21st birthday again because I had a midterm the next morning and couldn't afford the hangover. Meanwhile, Claire's PR firm launched with a small event that my parents attended, posted about constantly, framed the invitation and hung it in the living room. The same living room where my graduation had never once been mentioned again. I graduated with honors and about $61,000 in student debt. Claire's firm, by the way, folded 18 months after it opened. The business partner turned out to be significantly less reliable than advertised, and most of the initial investment, my college fund, evaporated into unpaid vendor contracts and a lease she couldn't get out of. Nobody in my family ever apologized to me. Not once. When the firm failed, the narrative in my family somehow became about how unlucky Claire had been, how hard she'd tried, how brave it was that she took the risk at all. I sat through an entire Thanksgiving dinner listening to my dad console her about lost dreams, while I was quietly paying off a $61,000 loan for a degree I'd fought tooth and nail to keep, in the same house where nobody had once asked how my dreams were going. I want to pause here and say something to anyone listening who's been in a similar position. The unfairness doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it's just quiet, consistent erosion being told in 1,000 small ways that your needs are negotiable and someone else's aren't. That erosion is real. It counts. You're allowed to be angry about it even if nobody else in the room seems to notice it. Happened after graduation. I got a junior position at a mid-sized architecture firm in a different state. I chose the distance on purpose. I needed physical space to figure out who I was without the family hierarchy defining me. The next several years were about quietly, stubbornly building a life. I worked ridiculous hours, but this time it felt different. It was for me, not in spite of someone else. I got licensed. I moved to a senior designer role. I started taking small freelance residential projects on the side, renovations mostly, because I liked the intimacy of it, helping a normal family reshape the place where they actually lived their lives. Around year 8 after graduation, a friend from grad school and I started our own small firm. It wasn't overnight success. We nearly went under twice in the first 2 years, but we specialized in something that turned out to be lucrative, helping people flip and renovate distressed properties, foreclosures, estate sales, and yes, auction houses for resale. I learned the auction system inside and out. I learned how county share of sales worked, how tax lien auctions worked, how to read a property's financial history like a novel with a predictable ending if you knew where to look. I want to be clear. I wasn't thinking about my parents' house during any of this. This isn't a revenge thriller where I plotted for a decade. Life had simply, organically, made me an expert in exactly the field I would eventually need. By year 11, our firm was doing well, genuinely well. I bought a modest but beautiful house of my own, something I designed almost every detail of myself. The kind of house 12-year-old me used to sketch in notebooks during lunch period. I had built from absolute scratch. Exactly the kind of financial security my parents told me I'd have to figure out. It was a Tuesday in October when my mom called me. We spoke maybe 4 times a year at that point: birthdays, holidays, the occasional just checking in. That always somehow circled back to Claire's latest venture. She'd since had 2 more failed businesses, both quietly financed with money my parents never disclosed the source of. And both times, I noticed, nobody asked me to help fund them. I wasn't hurt by that. I was almost relieved. It meant I'd finally been written out of that particular ledger. But this call was different. My mom's voice was shaky. "We might lose a house," she said. Turned out my dad had taken out a second mortgage years earlier to help Claire. Of course, this time for a sure thing real estate investment that turned out to be neither real estate nor a sure thing. When that fell through, they refinanced again to cover the gap, at a much higher rate this time because their credit had already taken damage. Between medical bills from my dad's knee surgery, an economy that had squeezed their fixed income, and missed payments piling up, the house I grew up in, the house where my name had been quietly erased from a college fund at a kitchen table 14 years earlier, was heading toward foreclosure. My mom wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling to ask if I could help. Not emotionally, financially. "We were hoping," she said, her voice cracking in that practiced way I remembered from childhood dinners, "that since you're doing so well now, maybe you could help us catch up on payments, just until things stabilize." I sat in my office, phone against my ear, looking out over a city I'd built a career in without a single dollar of help from the people now asking me for money. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up, And for the first time in over a decade, I let myself actually feel the entire arc of what had happened to me. Not with bitterness exactly, with clarity. I didn't call her back for 6 weeks. Instead, I did what I do professionally. I researched the property. I want to say plainly, I wasn't doing this out of some cartoon villain scheme. I was doing it because it was the only language I fully trusted anymore. Facts, documents, numbers, feelings had failed me in that family my whole life. Paperwork never lied to me. I found the county records. The house had missed 4 mortgage payments. It was heading toward a pre-foreclosure notice, which if unresolved would eventually put it up for a share of sale auction. The same process I'd handled dozens of times professionally for clients. My parents, notably, never called Claire for help. I found that out later, almost by accident, from an aunt who let it slip during a family group chat. Claire, despite 3 failed businesses funded by money that used to be mine, was apparently not in a position to help right now. Meanwhile, I, who'd received nothing, was the first name they thought of. That detail, more than anything else, was the final piece that shifted something in me. It wasn't really about the money. It was the pattern, still playing out. 14 years later, I was still the fallback, the one who lands on her feet so thoroughly that they assumed I'd catch everyone else too. I made a decision. I wasn't going to bail them out. I was going to buy the house myself at auction, fair market value, through the same legal process anyone else could use, and I was going to do it without telling them until it was done. I won't pretend there wasn't a strange, almost surreal quality to prepping the paperwork. I sat with my business partner going through the listing, and she asked me gently, "Are you sure you want to do this? This isn't just a flip for you." I told her the truth. I didn't fully know what I wanted to do with the house once I owned it. I just knew I needed to be the one holding the keys, not the one holding the debt. The pre-foreclosure period lapsed. My parents, as far as I knew, had made no real progress toward catching up on payments. Claire's most recent, failed venture had left them tapped out trying to help her avoid her own bankruptcy filing. An irony I did not miss. The house went to a share of sale auction on a gray Thursday morning in March, on the courthouse steps downtown. I attended in person, which is unusual for me normally. I sent a representative or bid remotely through the firm, but I needed to see this one happen with my own eyes. I got there early. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath, and the courthouse steps were slick from an overnight drizzle. A dozen or so bidders had already gathered, most of them investors I recognized from the local flipping circuit, clutching folders and coffee cups, their faces blank with the practiced boredom of people who do this every week. What none of them knew, what nobody there knew except me, was that the address about to be called was the house I grew up in. The house where a birthday card once held $40 instead of a car. The house where a chemistry final got 2 seconds of attention. The house where nobody showed up to my graduation. I hadn't told my parents I'd be there. I hadn't told them the auction was happening at all. As far as they knew, I was still thinking about it, still deciding whether to write them a check. The auctioneer, an older man with a clipboard and a voice built for shouting numbers into cold air. "Read the address." I felt it hit my chest like a physical thing, hearing my childhood address spoken out loud in that flat, procedural tone, like it was just another line item on a Thursday morning. The bidding opened low. I raised my paddle. Another investor countered. I raised again. My heart was doing something it had never done in a professional setting before, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my face, I'm told, stayed completely still. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught me how to keep my hands from shaking even when everything inside me was anything but calm. The bidding climbed higher than I expected. For a moment, just a moment, another investor pushed a number up so aggressively that I genuinely thought I might lose it, might watch this house go to a stranger who'd never know what those walls meant to me. My stomach dropped at the thought. I raised my paddle one more time, higher than made strict financial sense, because in that moment it stopped being a transaction and became something else entirely. "Sold," the auctioneer said, pointing at me. To bidder 14. I stood there for a second, paddle still raised, feeling the cold air, feeling my own pulse in my ears, feeling something crack open in my chest that I hadn't let myself feel in over a decade. Nobody around me knew what had just happened. To them, it was bidder 14 closing a routine deal. To me, It was the closing of a 14-year-old wound. My name went on the deed less than an hour later. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot afterward and cried, really cried. The kind of crying I hadn't let myself do since that folding chair at graduation. Not out of sadness, but out of something closer to release. I didn't storm over to confront them. That's not really my style. And frankly, I wanted them to find out the way they'd always found out everything important about me indirectly, through paperwork, through other people, through a system that didn't center their feelings. The county sent the standard notice of ownership transfer to the property. My parents, still living in the house on a now uncertain month-to-month basis, opened that letter themselves. My mom called me within the hour, her voice somewhere between confused and panicked. "There's a letter here," she said. "It says the house has a new owner. Do you know anything about this?" I told her the truth. Plainly. No dramatics. "Yes. It's me. I bought the house at auction." There was a long silence. I could hear my dad's voice in the background asking what was wrong. And then I heard the phone change hands. Heard the particular shuffle of him grabbing it out of her grip. You bought our house?" His voice cracked in a way I had genuinely never heard before. Not once in 29 years. I could picture him exactly standing in that kitchen. The same kitchen where the college fund conversation happened. His face gone pale. One hand braced on the counter like the floor had shifted under him. I later found out from my mom that my dad actually sat down on the kitchen floor after that call ended. Just sat down. Right there on the tile, and didn't say anything for almost 20 minutes. "How could you do this to us? This is our home. And here's the moment I want you to sit with, because it's the whole point of the story," I said. "You're right. It was your home. And 14 years ago, at that kitchen table, you took my future and handed it to Claire without blinking. You missed my graduation for her launch event. You forgot my birthday for her big week. You called me first when you needed a bailout, but never once when there was something to give. I built this life without a single dollar from either of you. This house isn't a punishment. It's just the truth catching up to the math." They didn't have a response to that. Not a real one anyway. My mom cried. My dad hung up. 2 weeks later, my mom showed up at my office unannounced. I almost didn't let her up, but something in the way security described her. "She's just sitting in the lobby. She says she has a letter for you," made me go down. She didn't yell. She didn't defend herself. She just handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I recognized from decades of school permission slips, and said, "I should have given you this years ago," and left before I could respond. I opened it alone in my office that night. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. It was something stranger, a confession. My mom wrote that the college fund decision hadn't actually been a joint decision between her and my dad the way they'd always presented it. It had been almost entirely my dad's call, made under pressure from his own mother, my grandmother, who had always favored Claire the same way my parents eventually learned to. My mom wrote that she'd argued against it, quietly, at the time, and lost, and had spent every year since too ashamed to admit she'd let it happen without fighting harder. She wrote that watching me stand alone on graduation day, in photos a cousin had sent her, because she hadn't even been brave enough to check in that day herself, was the moment she started to understand what they'd actually done. She just never found the nerve to say it out loud until the house forced her to. It didn't fix everything. I want to be honest about that. A letter doesn't undo 14 years. But it was the first true thing anyone in my family had said to me about any of this. And for the first time, I understood that my mother's silence hadn't been indifference. It had been its own kind of cowardice, which isn't the same thing as innocence, but isn't quite the same thing as cruelty either. About a month after the auction, Claire didn't call. She showed up. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was at the house, my parents' old house. My house now, walking through it with a contractor, going over which repairs I wanted done before renewing the lease terms with my parents for another year. I heard a car door slam outside, too aggressively to be anyone but her, and then heels on the front walk, fast and sharp. She let herself in without knocking. Some habits apparently die hard, even when the deed says otherwise. "We need to talk," she said, standing in the same front hallway where 20 years earlier, my 10-year-old art project had once hung for exactly 3 seconds of her attention before she tore it down with a sentence. I told the contractor I'd catch up with him in a few minutes and walked Claire into the kitchen of all rooms. The same table. I don't think either of us said it out loud, but we both felt it. You humiliated Mom and Dad, she started, arms crossed, chin up, doing the thing she'd always done, where she led with an accusation instead of a request. Like offense was the best possible defense. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? People are talking, and Diane knows. It's mortifying. Mortifying, I repeated. That's an interesting word. You know what I found mortifying, Claire? Standing alone at my own graduation in a stadium full of families, because you had a launch event that day and apparently that mattered more. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes. The exact same motion she'd been perfecting since she was 13. Oh my God. We're still doing this. That was, what, 10 years ago. Get over it. 11. I said, and no, I don't think I will. Not until somebody in this family says the words, I was wrong, and actually means them. That threw her. Just slightly. I watched it land. Watched a practiced confidence flicker for half a second before she rebuilt it. Fine, she said, sharper now. You want honesty? Here's honesty. You were always going to be fine, Emma. That's just who you are. Reliable. Steady. I needed things. I needed opportunities. You never needed anything from anyone. So it never felt like we were taking something away from you. It felt like we were just giving it to the person who actually needed it. I let that sit in the room for a second, because I wanted her to hear herself say it out loud. Do you understand what you just did? I asked. You just told me, to my face, that the reason it was okay to take my future is because I didn't complain loudly enough about losing it. That's not an explanation, Claire. That's a confession. She didn't have anything for that. For maybe the first time in her life, I watched my sister run out of things to say. Then, because some patterns really do run bone deep, she pivoted. Her voice softened, dropped into the exact register she used to use on our parents when she wanted something warm, wounded, reasonable. Look, she said, I actually came here because I'm in a rough spot. The agency needs $12,000 before Monday or I lose the investor. I know things have been tense, but you're doing so well now. And honestly, family helps family, right? I actually laughed. Not cruelly, just at the sheer, breathtaking consistency of it, that even standing in the wreckage of the exact conversation we were having, she still thought this was the moment to ask me for money. Family does help family, I said. You would know. You helped yourself to 18 years of my future without asking. And Mom and Dad helped you do it. So no, Claire, I'm not giving you $12,000. I'm not giving you $12. And I want you to really sit with why you thought you could walk into this kitchen, tell me I didn't matter enough to protect, and then ask me to bail you out in the same breath. Her face went through something complicated, then anger first, then something that looked almost like real hurt, like it was finally actually landing. You've changed, she said quietly. No, I said. I've just stopped performing for an audience that was never going to clap for me anyway. She left without another word. No apology, no slam door, even just quiet, controlled footsteps back down the front walk. The same walk she used to command like she owned every inch of it. I haven't heard from her since. And honestly, for the first time in my life, that silence feels like peace instead of punishment. I didn't evict my parents from the house, by the way. I want to be clear about that. Instead, I offered them a lease, a real market rate lease, month to month, with the option to stay as long as they kept up with payments, same as any tenant. My mom took it. My dad still barely speaks to me, though last Christmas he sent a text, 4 words long. Roof doesn't leak anymore. I think, in his own broken way, that was as close to thank you as he's ever going to get. If there's a lesson in all this, and I think there is, it's not buy your parents' house out from under them. That's a very specific, very unusual set of circumstances, and I'm not encouraging anyone to go looking for that particular outcome. The real lesson is smaller and more universal. The version of you that people decide is low maintenance or always lands on their feet is often just a version of you that stopped asking for help out loud a long time ago. That doesn't mean you don't need it. It just means you learned to build it yourself. And sometimes the family that once quietly decided you didn't need saving is the same family that eventually needs saving from you on terms that, for once, are entirely your own. I didn't buy that house out of hate. I bought it because for the first time in my life, when a decision about that address was being made, my name was finally the one that mattered. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been the background character in your own family's story, I hope you know this. You're allowed to build a life so solid that no one gets to overlook you again.